This week's Torah portion is Shoftim. It's in the book of Deuteronomy. It's Moses' last speech to the Jewish people before they go into the land of Israel. And I want to start off with a story of some men who are in jail. They're prisoners, they're in jail, and they dig a hole. They dig a hole to find a way out. They want to get out of their jail cell. They build a tunnel, and in the middle of the night, they escape. They go through the tunnel out to freedom. The next day, the prison guards come to the cell, and there's one prisoner still left in the cell. He didn't go with his cellmates to freedom. He stayed in the cell. He stayed in prison. And the guards say to him, "What are you doing here? Why didn't you leave with your comrades?" And he says, "Well, it's not so bad here. I like it here. Maybe I'll just stay here." And this is a message. It sounds a bit funny. It sounds ludicrous. You want to break free from the prison that you're in. And this is where we are now. We're in the Jewish month of Elul. It's the month right before Rosh Hashanah, and it's a month that we can escape to. Just like those prisoners escape prison to go to freedom, so to a safe place, to somewhere they could go and become their best selves, hopefully. So too, we have a place in time called the month of Elul that we can go to, that we can be in, that's like a refuge. It's a place where we understand God is close, where there's a closeness of God to us, such that we can work very, very hard to access who we are and connect that to this enormity that is the divine, that we connect ourselves to something bigger than ourselves. And we can go inward and we can work on ourselves and move ourselves and change us. So what's the mechanism here? This month of Elul, as I mentioned, is right before the Jewish holiday of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And we understand that on Rosh Hashanah, God created Adam and Eve. 6 days before God created the Adam and Eve, God started to create the universe. The whole universe was created. And so before creation, there was only God. Ein od milvado, there was only God. And out of carving out a space within himself, God withdrew to create the universe, and then he created Adam and Eve. So too, in the month of Elul, we are before creation. We are in that time. We're in a time before creation, before time, where we can start again, where we can recreate ourselves, where we can become that which we want to be. It's a time for introspection. It's a time to imagine ourselves how we want to be. What is our desire? Who do we want to be? And we understand this idea of judgment, that God judges us for the good we do and the bad we do, and it sounds very punitive. But I'd like to offer another twist, that God is also judging us where we are now, where we are in this period, as to what it is that we need to be the best people we can be. What's going to bring out my best, my goodness, my loving kindness, my giving, all of those wonderful attributes that I want to have. What do I need to happen in the coming year so I can manifest those attributes? And that's another form of judgment that goes on at this time. And some of it is dependent on who I want to be. Who do I want to be? So in this week's Torah portion, we read this very famous saying, "Justice, justice shall you pursue." The idea of a justice that is just. And that we have officers at the gates, the policemen who are going to police the justice that is enacted by the judges. There are policemen that guard the law, so to speak, that are at the gates. And there's a very interesting understanding of what it means, the gates. Metaphorically, it's the gates into our inner selves. What is it that we allow into ourselves through our eyes, through our ears, through our mouths, through perhaps our skin and our noses? Like, what is it that we take in, and how do we filter it? What are the filters that we have? Do we allow ourselves just to access and watch anything on the television, on YouTube, on social media? Do we listen to everything, or do we filter things out and say, no, that's not good for me to listen to that or to watch that? I don't want that. I want these things. I want to strive to be this kind of person with these kind of influences coming at me. And so it's a time to think about what it is that we put, what we put our gates. How do we guard our eyes and our mouth and our nose and our ears and our touch? What is it that we do with those senses? What is it that we let in? Also, in this week's Torah portion, we learn of 3 categories. Actually, there's 4, but I'm only going to mention 3 categories of people who are exempt from fighting in wars, in battles. There are 4 categories. I'm going to mention 3 of the categories of people who are exempt from fighting in the wars to claim the land of Israel. Somebody who has built a house but has not yet lived in that house is exempt from fighting. Somebody who has planted a vineyard and has not yet had a crop and enjoyed the fruits of his labor, that person doesn't have to go to war. And finally, the person who is betrothed to be married and hasn't yet married, that person doesn't have to go to war. So what we see here is that these three categories, somebody who builds, somebody who plants, and somebody who engages in deep relationships and connecting and procreating, perhaps, that these are the three foundations of our world, and they're very godlike expressions of what we can do in the world. So if you look back again at creation, God created a home for us. He created the world. He created the universe. God built the world. God planted the Garden of Eden. He planted the place for the people that God will then create to live in, planted a garden. And then God created Adam and Eve to have a relationship with each other, to procreate, and to have a relationship with the divine. So we have God qualities of building, planting, and creation of relationships. And then those people that do that in this world, those people are exempt from going to war. Why? Because they're the foundation of our world. They are what affirms our lives. That's what we're predicated on, is affirmation of life and being God-like. Fantastic story I read today. 2.5 years ago, in outside of Jerusalem, there was a terrible terror attack that resulted in the wounding of a mother and her husband and the unborn baby that she was carrying, 7 months. She was 7 months pregnant at the time, and the baby was delivered at Shaare Zedek Hospital 2.5 years ago. The baby apparently lived for 3 days, and then very, very sadly and tragically, the baby died. 2.5 years later, the mother's recovered, the father's recovered, and just this week, that couple gave birth to a healthy baby boy in Shaare Zedek Hospital. The same staff, nurses, doctors that were there that delivered that first baby by cesarean section after that tragic terrorist attack were the same people that brought this healthy baby into the world. And this, I think, is an example of the affirmation of life. What are we willing to fight for? And what are we willing to die for? And what do we live our lives for? And perhaps the message is we live our lives for the things we are willing to die for. And so the Jewish people are going into the land of Israel, and they're going to set up their judiciary system. They're going to have their policemen. They're going to have the prophets and the priests, and they're going to have a king, the king who's going to know that there's always a God above him. He has to carry with him a Sefer Torah, a Torah scroll that he himself writes. He has to have two always, one in his house and one that he takes with him on the road. He has to not have too many wives. He must not have too much money. He must not have too many horses. Why? To remember that there's a God above you. There's a God that is the top of the totem pole, and that you, king, are not, or the judge, or the priests, or the prophets, or the policemen. There's a God above us all. Finally, I want to bring out this point that we are enjoined to be tamim, wholesome, perfect with our God, simple with our God. We're supposed to be in relationship with God as a wholesome person. What does that mean? And if you look back in the Torah, Jacob, our forefather, is described as an ish tam, as a wholesome man. He's able to take the attribute of kindness that he got from his grandfather, excessive loving kindness, and the attribute of strictness and justice and boundaries that he got from his father Isaac. And he could take those two attributes and combine them into a perfect synthesis, a perfect harmony of tiferet, of tamim, of wholesomeness. Not too much giving, not too much strictness, but a perfect balance of the two. Ish tam, a man of wholesomeness. And we are enjoined to be tamim, to be wholesome, to recognize that there's a God, to know that God is with us, know that God is holding us, and it's all for the good. Gam zu l'tova, it's all for the good, even if we don't feel that. and we should therefore have no fear. The king is enjoined to be God-fearing. The judges are enjoined to be God-fearing, meaning that they have an awe of God and they recognize that God is above all else and there is nothing other than God. So we may be in positions of power or not, and we may have our own sense of how things would be, and it might not go the way we want, but we have to let go and say, I've done my best and it's all for the best. And maybe I'll see it, maybe I won't see it, but at the end, there's a simplicity of that relationship that gives us hope, that we live without fear. We say Psalm 27 over and over and again in this month, that proclaims that we have no fear because God is near.